Welcome back. The panel is with us from their remote locations. NBC News White House correspondent Peter Alexander, Danielle Pletka, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. Welcome. I want to show the president's job approval rating trend in our new NBC Wall Street Journal poll. Here it is from April of 2019. I want to show you these numbers here. 46 approved, 51 disapproved. Now think about what's happened, guys. We had an impeachment and a pandemic. So an impeachment and a pandemic has happened in between April of 19 and April of 2020, and the president's job ratings are 46% approve, 51% disapprove. Peter Alexander, obviously the durable nature of the president at times it knows no bounds. A pandemic, an impeachment, nothing seems to break through there. That said, the president seems to be, and I'm curious, Peter, he seems to have moved on to a new phase. He seems to have believed he's got a big part of his job on the pandemic done.
Yeah, Chuck, I think you're exactly right. And in my conversations with White House officials and those close to the president, they agree. They say, in the eyes of the president, this is the transition to a new phase. But what's particularly striking here is you sort of have this me president in what is best described as a we crisis. The president, who, as you said earlier in your conversation with the vice president, is trying to sort of claim credit for the guidelines being out. They say they beat the May 1st deadline, saying that he's trying to move the economy on, get things back to normal life, is also now casting the blame for perceived failures on testing and other issues if the economy isn't to come back quick enough on the governors here. And you just compare that, Chuck, to what Americans, a lot of them, millions of Americans, watched last night with leaders and artists together in this concert that was watched around the globe, right? This was something that focused on the sort of sense of togetherness right now, acting selflessly, working together with other nations, including, frankly, the World Health Organization, and the effort to stay inside. Most presidents you would see really raise, their numbers would rise dramatically in moments of crisis like this. It hasn't been the case for this president.
No, there's been a temptation to engage politically. But Jay Johnson, as a former head of DHS, how would a national testing strategy work if you were told to put together a national strategy?
Two things. First, Chuck, I do have to put my public safety hat back on here. The president, the vice president, the White House are so anxious to say the worst is over, we're on a downward trajectory, we're flattening the curve, without delivering the equally important accompanying message that Governor Cuomo and others have been so good at, which is we're still in the depths of this crisis, and we still need to be vigilant and rigorous in our social distancing and the like in order to get to where we all want to be. Now, that aside, the vice president in his interview with you said 3 times, we have the testing in place right now to go to phase 1 of the White House guidelines. But if you read the White House guidelines carefully, phase 1 is still social distancing, keep the vulnerable population at home, no common areas, bars closed, non-essential travel should be banned. So phase 1 looks a lot like mid-early March. And so it's relatively easy to say we have the testing adequate for that right now. To go back to normalcy, we need way more than what we have right now, which is why there needs to be a national federal effort at getting what we need to do the testing.
Danny Pletka, we shouldn't be surprised by the president's eagerness to open. I get that, and that is to be charitable, one way to look at what he's doing. But he also seems to be desperate to engage politically in this in ways that feel like they're unhelpful to him long term.
You know, we've all been having this conversation since Donald Trump was elected. At the beginning, everybody hoped that campaign Don was not going to be President Donald Trump, and that didn't happen. And at this point, I think we need to recognize that there is not going to be any personal growth in office for Donald Trump. You know, he is going to be the man who he was, and we shouldn't be surprised. He wants to take the credit where he can take the credit and shift the blame, because that's who he is, and to be fair, most politicians are going to be that way. On the other hand, I think he's in an extraordinarily difficult position. 22 million people have filed for unemployment.
Yep.
When we talk about those numbers, we are talking about people's lives. We're talking about people's income. We are talking about their well-being in ways that aren't about the coronavirus. And to want to give people hope and the sight of a light at the end of the tunnel is something I think the president needs to do. The problem is, of course, he also needs to be there helping to provide the tools necessary on a state-by-state level. And that's where the government, and especially the FDA, from my standpoint, is falling down on the job.
Yeah. Peter, the way this response has worked in the past is that they dig their heels in, they're not going to do something, and then literally they'll do a 180. What's the likelihood they do a 180 and say, you know what, you're right, we should take over testing?
Well, I think you saw them try to sort of detail what they view as the national testing strategy in your conversation with the vice president. But, Chuck, I'm struck by the continued mixed messaging by this administration here. Consider the president with those liberate tweets about Minnesota, Michigan, and about Virginia. All three states with Democratic governors. All three states are battlegrounds. In effect, here you have the president as the leader of the resistance against his own policies, right? The bottom line is back and forth once again on this issue. One day he claims total authority. The next day he's blaming the governors. They put out the guidelines. The day after that he says, hey, we need to remove these guidelines in effect in those places. Consider his past mixed messages on issues like the mask, when the CDC put out its guidelines, and moments later the president said, well, I don't really plan to wear it, and back and forth on the DPA as well. This is an unprecedented moment. And in fact, we don't know what the backlash, how this will backfire here. It's a test. We wait to see how Americans respond.
Hey, Jay Johnson, just very quickly, do you think it looks odd that Congress isn't working, that they're trying to do this remotely? It's like, look, at the end of the day, you chose to be an elected official. You chose to be in public service. You do probably have to risk your life more than somebody who chose not to be. Should they physically be here? Maybe protect their staffs, but these individual members?
Well, in defense of members of Congress, the reality is that most of them, just like we are right now, can do their jobs remotely. They can't vote on the House floor or the Senate floor, obviously, and maybe we need to look at how you can make that work. But I'm sure most members of Congress are pretty busy right now, even though they're not physically in Washington.
I guess, but I have to say, it's like part of me that it does seem odd. They're not here. The governors are on the job. Everybody else is on the job. Anyway, but I'm going to pause it here. When we come back, why some people are doing so much better than others economically during this crisis. But first, here are some New York City firefighters thanking healthcare workers in Brooklyn. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.